Welcome to CurveSetter MCAT Prep, the only MCAT prep company in the world staffed entirely by 99 plus percentile scorers. So today we're going to do another CARS passage, but this time it's going to be a little bit more legal, philosophical, in that kind of realm. And these are the types of passages that a lot of students have trouble with because it's easy to get lost and to lose focus in them. So hopefully I'm going to try to give you some of my tips throughout the video so that you can keep focus and get the main idea and try to apply those to the questions. So let's get started. Human rights as an idea, as an issue in religious, political, and moral philosophy, has an ancient and illustrious pedigree. Okay? So basically the sentence is just saying is that human rights is old. It's not something new. The English Bill of Rights and more emphatically, the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the French Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen were all based on the idea of inalienable, universal, and absolute rights. Nor is it true that the idea of human rights is an invention alien to most non-Western cultures and that it has been foisted on a more or less unwilling world. Okay, so over here it's saying that it's ancient, right? So it's saying that the Bill of Rights had it, the Declaration of Independence had it, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen had it, and it's saying that also it's not like it's just a Western idea and that we forced it on non-Western countries. So basically it's going to say that other countries have had these ideas as well. Even if there were no explicit covenants to that effect in traditional societies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the idea of freedom was hardly alien to those civilizations. Okay, so that's exactly what I was saying. Throughout the last century, it was commonly argued that international law concerned states alone, but this interpretation is no longer widely held. So before they said that international law was just to do with the state, and now it's saying that it's probably not just a state. So international law is not just between United States and Mexico, but probably it has to do with people as well within those countries. A new approach manifested itself in the Atlantic Charter of 1941, in the Declaration of the United Nations the year after, and in countless speeches of wartime leaders. This new approach found expression in the United Nations Charter, and more specifically in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, approved without a dissenting voice in December 1948. So these are all these examples of documents in which international law is not just applied to states, but also probably to people as well. The President of the General Assembly, Dr. H.V. Evatt of Australia, said at the time that this was the first occasion on which the organized world community had recognized the existence of human rights and fundamental freedoms transcending the laws of each sovereign state. Okay. But although millions of men and women have indeed turned to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they have received very little guidance and no help from the organization that propagated it. Okay, so this is interesting. So in the beginning, the passage kind of argues that human rights is not just it's not something new, and it's not just Western, but that it's been around for a long time, and that it existed in countries that weren't Western. Maybe they weren't written down explicitly, like it says right here, but they still existed. And now you kind of see this shift towards saying that, okay, so we had all these documents that said that international law should not just apply to states alone, they should apply to people. And you have this document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and many people look to it, but it didn't have any actual functional, or maybe didn't have a pragmatic use to it. So it was just written there, and it just didn't achieve what it was supposed to. The failure, so that's a really strong word, so I want you to pay attention to that. The failure of the United Nations to live up to early expectations and to become an effective instrument for the promotion of human rights has induced individual governments and non-governmental bodies to take fresh initiatives in this area. So it's saying that this declaration was so useless that people had to essentially create new avenues to promote these rights. In 1947, the Organization of American States passed a Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Humankind. In 1950, the Council of Europe agreed on a covenant for the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms established the European Commission for Human Rights, as well as the European Court in Strasbourg, that has heard many cases since it first met in 1960. So these are all, again, examples of new bodies that were created to fill in or to take the place of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Various private bodies, such as the International League for Human Rights, Freedom House, and Amnesty International, have published reports about conditions of oppression in various parts of the world, drawing attention to particularly flagrant violations and on occasion mobilizing public support to bring pressure on the governments concerned. It was clear in the very beginning that the walls of oppression would not crumble at the first clarion call. Okay, so it's saying that it was very obvious that just by bringing publicity to oppression, it wasn't going to collapse it, right? That it wasn't going to end it. We weren't going to solve oppression just by bringing attention to it once. The cultural and social context, the level of development of each country, are factors that have to be taken into account. Okay, so it's saying that these are they're specific. We should look at them relative to where we are. Okay, so maybe the United States should be on a different standard compared to India, for instance. What has especially to be considered is the general trend in a country. Has there been movement toward greater human rights or away from them? However underdeveloped a country, there is no convincing argument in favor of torture, of arbitrary execution, of keeping sections of a population or a whole people in a state of slavery. The case for human rights is unassailable. Okay, so although he makes some concession, right, the author says, hey, we got to look at this cultural and social context. The most important thing is to see that has there been a movement towards greater human rights or away? It's saying, however, there are still certain things that no matter what state the country is in, no matter what the cultural and social contexts are, certain things are unacceptable. And it's saying, and it highlights those things. It's saying you can't do torture, you can't do arbitrary, summary executions, you can't have slavery. But besides that, he's pretty soft in saying that if you're improving, that's okay with me. Okay. So maybe this wasn't too bad of a passage, but I just want to quickly summarize each paragraph so you kind of have an idea of what's going on. So again, over here he's saying that human rights is old and it's not just Western. In the next paragraph he says that we formed a few bodies in around the 40s that tried to codify these international laws to apply to humans and human rights, so not just between states. And then it says that these weren't really that effective. Okay, so they published these things, and you had to have a bunch of other organizations step in because they weren't really doing anything. And what these things did was they wrote reports and they drew attention and they mobilized public support. And then it says in this final paragraph that it's not that easy to implement these things. You have to look at the cultural and social contexts, and you have to look at relative to that country that you're looking at. Have they been improving or not? And then it again says that there are certain things that no matter how old, no matter how the country is, there's certain things that are not acceptable in any way whatsoever. Okay, so let's go through the questions. According to the passage, when judging the human rights record of a country, one must take into account 1, the country's level of development. Yes, that's something that they set up here. Where is that? Development of each country, the level of development. So that's 1 is correct. The country's social and cultural circumstances. Yes, that's stated almost explicitly. Whether the country is moving toward or away from human rights. Okay, so that's D, right? All 3 of those is correct. That's a really easy question. It's probably one of the easiest I've seen on the car section for an A and C passage. Regarding the concept of human rights, the author asserts that non-Western cultures originated the concept of human rights. Absolutely not. It doesn't say who originated it. Okay, so it says, all it does say is that that this idea of human rights isn't alien to other non-Western places. So it's in that other places were aware of it, but there was no indication of where it originated. Okay, so the reason why you have to pay really close attention is because sometimes they'll throw in a word one word that will throw the entire question off, or the answer choice off. So in this case, it's originated. This is a really strong word. That means you have to be able to point and say in a sentence that this place, like they started it. And there was nowhere in the passage that says that. So A is completely wrong. B, understood human rights before being exposed to Western cultures. Sorry. All right, let's reread that. Regarding the concept of human rights, the author asserts that non-Western cultures understood human rights before being exposed to Western cultures. That sounds pretty good to me, but let's move on and see if we can rule anything else out. C, initially resisted the concept of human rights introduced by Western cultures. No, that just wasn't stated in the passage, right? It just said that the only thing they said that was these ideas were not alien, and that sounds like answer choice B, but let's move on to C. To D. Developed explicit covenants about human rights before Western culture did so. No, that wasn't said either. If anything, they said they weren't really explicit. So he says even if there were no, so there probably weren't any, but that's not really a strong statement. So looks like B is the best answer here. All right. Question 80. The U.S. Declaration of Independence and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen are cited in the passage as evidence that A, the concept of human rights was not alien to early non-Western cultures. No, these are Western cultures, right? U.S., French, and anyways, this was cited earlier than that statement. Anyways, see, this was cited first. That was an example for it being ancient and illustrious. So you have to look at the order of things. So the statement where it said it's not alien it comes after, right? So obviously it couldn't be referring to that. So this would be an example. Okay. So that would rule out A. B, the English Bill of Rights was not the early document that promoted human rights. I don't think so, right? The English Bill of Rights was not the only early document. It wasn't stated in that context. It's not like it said the English Bill of Rights wasn't the only, and then it gave you two examples of things that weren't. Okay, three things were grouped together. So it wasn't, the English Bill of Rights was not used as a point of comparison against the other two. Okay, so that rules out B. C, throughout the last century, it was commonly held that international law only applied to states. Again, this statement was made way before that. Okay, so, I mean, this is a really extreme example of how easy it can get. But essentially, obviously, if this statement came before A and C, it obviously couldn't be used as evidence for A and C, right? A and C were mentioned way later in the passage. So we can immediately rule those two out. And then we have answer choice D. The issue of human rights has been prominent in world thinking for centuries. Okay, that sounds fine to me. So basically, A and C are completely out because of the chronology of the passage. This was first, and these two ideas came after. The reason why B is incorrect is because there was no distinction made between the Bill of Rights and these other two documents. They were grouped together, so there's no way you can use them as a point of comparison. And also D kind of makes sense, right? They said the very first sentence of the paragraph said that it has an ancient and illustrious pedigree, and then it gives you examples of how that makes sense. All right, so we're going to go with answer choice D here. Question 81. The passage implies that an undeveloped country that replaces a repressive dictator with a democratic leader sworn to oppose the persecution of the country's citizens should be A, praised cautiously for its first steps at moving away from human rights abuses. That sounds good to me, right? The author said that it's important to see that there's improvement, okay? But maybe, so then you'd ask, like, why does it say cautiously? Because we're not exactly sure. It says that he swore to oppose the persecution, right? So that sounds all, well and good, but a lot of politicians say things and they not necessarily actually follow them out. So you should praise him cautiously until we actually see these things implemented. Okay, so far A sounds really good. B says monitored intensely for possible human rights abuses. That just wasn't. I mean, that would make logical sense, I guess. Well, first of all, maybe not intensely. Like, they're moving in the right direction. Why would you want to start monitoring them intensely? And also, the passage doesn't really tell us how to deal with them, like how to react to countries that are being oppressive. So B is kind of is a stretch. Like we don't. I mean, it would make sense maybe in some circumstances, but we don't necessarily know that the author himself would approve of that. Okay. C, forgiven its past persecution due to the poor condition of its economy. So remember, the author said that some persecutions like cannot be forgiven, right? So if there was torture, summary executions, things like that, those are never okay. So if that's considered to be included in the past persecutions, he definitely would not be okay with forgiving them. Those are unforgivable, essentially. And D, criticized harshly for not having instituted democratic reforms sooner. That's not true, right? So he said that all I care about is if they're moving in the right direction, and that we actually, to do the opposite, we have to look at the context. So if the context says that this is the way that the country started off at, you can't blame them for that context, so long as they aren't violating like those certain rights that were enumerated, like tortures and things like that. So the only answer choice that seems correct is A. So we're going to go with that. Okay, 82. On the sole basis of the passage. So that's a really important statement. They're saying do not bring out any outside information. Do not use your own intuition or judgment or whatever. Just literally base it off the passage. Determine which of the following acts the author would most want to see forbidden by international law, regardless of the level of development of the country in which it takes place. Okay, so this is really, we're beating that horse here. So what did we say? We said torture, summary executions, and slavery. Okay, so A says using private property for state purposes. Nope. B, placing certain conditions on the right to vote. That's not considered of any of those three. C, suspending certain freedoms in times of national emergency. First of all, that happens in like every country. Okay, so definitely not. So does B. You can't be a felon and vote in the United States. A happens all the time. It's called prospective easement. So A, B, and C actually happen in the United States all the time, which is pretty funny. And D, torturing political dissidents. Yep, you can't torture. That's something that he said. Okay, so D is the answer. Passage information indicates that if a people were suffering persecution by the government, they would probably most benefit by bringing their case to the attention of what? Okay. So, passage information. So we're going to look in the passage where the author made an allusion to certain organizations being more effective than others. Okay, so there are some organizations that he said that weren't really that effective, and we're not going to choose those, right? And there are others that he said are. Okay, so the ones that aren't really that effective have to do with the UN, right? The failure of the United Nations. That's a really, really strong statement. All these things were developed out of that failure to address that failure, essentially. And so that includes, all these organizations and these councils and whatever, and then as well as the private bodies like International League of Human Rights, Freedom House, and Amnesty International. Okay, so those are the ones we're going to go for. So United Nations, no, they failed, remember? The Organization of American States, I don't even know where that's from. Okay, so this one says, they passed the Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Humankind. That one's, I guess, okay, because it was made to address the failure of the United Nations, but we don't really know how effective they are. We don't have any evidence that they've done, they could have just done the same thing, like just passed a declaration that did nothing. Okay, so that one we're on the fence for. We're gonna try to see if there's a better answer than that. C, Amnesty International. So Amnesty International, we know actually has done things. These three organizations, Freedom House, Amnesty, whatever, blah blah, they have published reports, drew attention, and mobilized public support to bring pressure on government's concern. So these three organizations, based on the passage, have actually done things. Right, we have the most evidence of them getting things done, and so I would definitely go with C over going with B. Right, so these guys have just declared something. So what? The United Nations has done as well. Amnesty International has actually gotten things done according to the passage, and D, the elected leader of the country. There was no information indicating that that's true, and especially if the leader is like some despot, right, that'd probably get you killed. So we're gonna go with C. Okay, last one. Which of the following statements most strongly challenges one of the assertions made in the passage? So which one of these statements goes against the main idea? A, the citizens of any country have the right to disobey unjust laws. So there's nothing, if anything, that probably supports the stuff in the passage saying like torture, slavery, and summary executions are not tolerable. So if those are laws that exist, then if anything, the author would probably support people disobeying those laws or getting around them somehow. B, countries have the right to manage their own internal affairs without outside interference. I don't know about that. Countries have the right to manage their own internal affairs without outside interference. Let's come back to that one. C, some governments may move more slowly than others towards implementing human rights laws. Yes, he said that before. He said you have to look at the cultural and social contexts, blah, blah, blah. Even the passage of universal human rights laws will not immediately stop all oppression. That's another statement that was made directly here. It was clear from the very beginning of that the walls of oppression would not crumble at the first clearing call. So that's out, right? So it looks like B is the only one we can't cross out. It's kind of hard to know why B is correct, like why it's a good answer. But I'd probably say that when it comes to human rights, the author would argue that human rights are universal. And so a certain country can't just say, hey, we're going to throw out our human rights, like the rights of our humans, our citizens, because they're supposed to be universal. So no one country can say, I'm going to throw mine out and I'm going to have my own laws. So he probably wouldn't agree with that. This guy's kind of more of a globalist. He wants there to be collaboration between countries, making sure that everyone's checking up on each other, things like that. So B is okay. The rest are just wrong, so that would make B the right answer. All right, thanks for listening.